So again, good morning, everyone. Sorry for the minor detail of me not being able to share my screen. Thank you for coming to my presentation. I'm doing my PhD in Brighton, and today I will present you my ideas on the communication of the ineffable in artworks, particularly in the Parthenon Marbles, which is a set of ancient Greek sculptures from the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. So in this presentation, I'll start with a brief introduction to the concept of ineffability before referring to how relevance theory has viewed the communication of emotions so far, which is mainly a propositional view. And that being said, the affective turn in pragmatics treats the communication of affect in non-propositional terms. And this, I think, will provide the ground to discuss the ineffable in the Parthenon Marbles. I will conclude my presentation with a quick but hopefully insightful summary. So words are incredibly useful communicative tools, none can deny that. And yet they fail us every day when we try to communicate thoughts mixed with feelings and emotions, or when we try to explain what a poem or an artwork means to us. Words are simply not enough. There will always be something missing, aspects of meaning that cannot be adequately paraphrased using linguistic means. And the linguistic term for this phenomenon, the failing attempt to paraphrase or fully express our thoughts and emotions using words, is defined as descriptive ineffability. And whilst ineffability is typically associated with words, the ineffable resides in artworks as well. So now how we deal with ineffability within a theory of utterance interpretation is a challenge. And the affective turn in pragmatics suggests that the ineffable aspects of meaning might be non-propositional. And for that reason, relevance theorists have proposed and have introduced new types of effects to complement cognitive effects. So these non-propositional effects are on the one hand affective effects and on the other perceptual effects. And I will refer to them later during this presentation. So my proposal is that when we interpret artworks, perceptual and affective effects interact, classing together, leading to an enhanced aesthetic experience. A case in point, I believe, is the Parthenon Marbles, which triggered Keats into writing his sonnet on seeing the Elgin marbles. So how does a pragmatic theory of communication and cognition further explain the communication of affect in propositional terms? According to the communicative principle of relevance, we communicate a set of assumptions, presupposing that it is optimally relevant to the audience. Now, the audience will process them by means of perception, conception, decoding, or inference. The assumptions that the hearer has, including her emotions, feelings, sensations, and attitudes, constitute her cognitive environment. Now, assumptions may be manifest to different degrees. Explicatures, the more salient assumptions, are more likely to be mentally represented than those that are not strongly manifest, and these are implicatures. Examples of strong communication can be fully paraphrased, whereas the indeterminacy of weak communication leads to a wide array of weak cognitive effects. In the case of the poetic metaphor, for example, that relevance theorists really love, Juliet is a son. Now, the paradigmatic example of weak communication is poetic effects that are associated with utterances that achieve their relevance through weak implicatures. And although cognitive mutuality for successful communication is necessary, in the case of poetic effects, we can observe affective mutuality. And for that reason, Sperber and Wilson argue that poetic effects are a wide array of minute cognitive effects, as we can see in the diagram. They're not as intense as cognitive effects are. For Pilkington, the affective aspect of communication is essential and central rather than secondary, as poetic effects communicate phenomenal aspects of experience. However, it could be argued that creative language use contributes to a new concept to the proposition expressed rather than communicating a range of weak implicatures. This also suggests the centrality of expressive meaning. When it comes to the appreciation of artworks, the aesthetic value and pleasure depend on the intensity and precision of the qualitative states evoked by the artwork, and this yields poetic effects. Now, depending on the degree of strength with which the informative intention of a particular assumption is mutually manifest, Sperber and Wilson suggest that there is a continuum of cases ranging from determined to indeterminate meaning and showing. In addition to the propositional nature of poetic effects, Wilson and Karsten explain the activation of mental images and affective states in the audience by defining non-propositional effects as weak arrays of communicated propositions. These non-propositional effects contribute to the propositional content of an utterance by being part of the intended import of an ostensive act in creative language use. Nevertheless, in this respect, their view on emotions remains a propositional account. Now, I'm not denying that there are some affective responses that can trigger cognitive effects. I'm not denying that at all. However, there might be some affective responses that might not be considered cognitive and therefore propositional. And this is where the affective turn in pragmatics comes in hand. So affective effects are a very useful tool to explain how to interpret the expressive layer of communication. And emotion appears to be essential to human cognition. And for that, relevance theorists have proposed that cognitive effects should be supplemented by affective effects. Now, affective effects arise either as precursors to cognitive effects or interact with them by enabling a further process and boost the search for cognitive effects. This occurs by efficiently adjusting the context of interpretation and presumption of relevance whilst drawing on personal experience. As Wharton and Stray have noted, affective effects bridge the gap between feelings and cognition as they work in tandem with the course of reasoning, influencing the hearer in the search for relevance. So communication is not solely about proposition as it seems, it's about communicating something else. And this, according to Wharton, is feeling. Another useful tool whose role is supplementary to cognitive effects is perceptual effects. Perceptual effects constitute a neurologically real set of perceptual and sensory motor system improving modifications that explain why humans allocate energy to artistic stimuli. Therefore, a non-artistic stimulus won't render perceptual effects. Also, artworks seem to have an intrinsic value that according to this value, they cannot be treated solely as ostensive stimuli that give rise to cognitive effects. And for that reason, they yield perceptual effects. Now, since perceptual effects occur along with cognitive effects, yet they are not mutually exclusive, Kolaiti suggests that perceptual effects activate minimal cognitive effects. Now, art, I think, in every form is the quintessential example of ineffability, as artists attempt to materialize something ineffable in their artworks. As we've seen so far with relevance theory, artistic stimuli trigger perceptual effects and affective effects. Perceptual effects in particular construct an aesthetic experience instead of simply communicating conceptual descriptions. Now, when we encounter something that contains ineffable qualities, whether this is a song, a poem, a painting, or a sculpture, we are expected to interpret something that is beyond what we traditionally call meaning. Aesthetic experiences and the pleasure derived from an artwork may trigger elements of ineffability in the form of perceptual and affective effects. What I argue, however, is that under certain circumstances, we might encounter an enhanced aesthetic experience, which is prompted by the degree to an artwork, and of course its meaning, becomes relevant to the audience. Any attempt to explain this enhanced aesthetic experience might be unsuccessful and possibly lead to frustration. Fabb portrays experiences of ineffable significance with similar colors. These experiences involve an unexpected feeling of awareness that what the individual is experiencing is very significant to them, but yet they fail to describe it using words. Ineffability in that case arises from the way the representational systems operate and the mismatch between what is represented and what is expected to be represented. Now, for enhanced aesthetic experiences, they occur due to either external factors, which could be the location or a specific moment the event occurs, or internal factors like memories or affective states, or a combination of both. And these factors optimize the relevance of the artwork. Now, at this point, I would like to argue that in these occasions, when we experience this enhanced aesthetic experience, when we experience and appreciate artworks, a proliferation of non-propositional effects is activated as perceptual and affective effects clash together. So during an enhanced aesthetic experience, my proposal is this proliferation of non-propositional effects of a combination of perceptual and affective effects, which rapidly multiply by feasting on the ineffable. And this is where the ink blot appears in the diagram, where perceptual and affective effects intersect. The interpretation of artwork and appreciation of art in general, nonetheless, is a very subjective experience. The way each one of us might evaluate, interpret, or derive pleasure from it depends on how relevant its meaning seems to be for the individual. So in other words, we will be drawn to artistic stimuli that are most relevant to us because of the relevance of the ineffable they express. And let's see how this applies to the Parthenon marbles. So I won't focus on the socio-political and cultural background of the marbles. I will very briefly mention that it's about a set of sculptures from the Parthenon in Athens, in Greece. Some of them are displayed in the Acropolis Museum, whereas others are in the British Museum. I won't get started on that. So the Parthenon marbles, including the caryatids of the Erechtheion, another temple in the Parthenon, are perfect examples of ineffability. And let me explain why. So Hazlitt argues that the marbles being copied from nature go beyond imagination. And since they imitate nature, they are the greatest form of art and the perfect example of the impossible in distinguishing art from nature. Now, the importance of the whole has been a common principle that proves the authority of the Parthenon sculptures in art among scholars. And they seem to insist on how cardinal is the unity of parts into a whole, as through this unity, the sublime arises, enhancing our beliefs. This change in our cognitive environment is triggered by sublimity, and the sublime is an expression of the ineffable. The absolute perfection of the marbles seems to be the reason why the principles that apply to them pertain to all art. Now, as for the inefficacy of language that leads to the ineffable in these sculptures, this can be also observed in the caryatids, female figures functioning as pillars in the caryatid porch of the Erechtheion in the Acropolis. And thinking about Fabb's idea on the experience of the sublime as either a match exceeding the normal range of discrepancy between two representations or a matching below that range, along with Hazlitt's observation that the Parthenon marbles are in perfect harmony with nature. The interpretation of the sublime in that case is one below the normal range of variation between what they look like and what they represent. It's not unusual for artworks to be a source of inspiration for other artists. Ekphrastic poetry is a specific type of poetry that explores art using the literary device of ekphrasis. And while ekphrasis in Greece means expression and description, ekphrastic poems are something about outside the poem, as they communicate something outside the poem, focusing on artistic expression in general, but also the effects a specific artwork resonates. So, for example, Keats' sonnet, as we can see, I have included just 2 lines. Such dim conceived glories of the brain bring round the heart an undescribable feud. Explores the ineffable meaning of the marbles, in addition to how art appreciators experience the ineffable. So Keats is unable to express verbally their ineffable meaning. His mental feud is undescribable, as the marbles represent something that can only be dimly understood. The inefficacy of language in that case is linked with the inadequacy of perception. Also, McCallum and Mitchell note that an object of art is often associated with very ceremonial, careful treatment, prompting deeper contemplation, as we can see in that case as well. Keats seems to experience an aha moment, which activates positive affect and all leading to inspiration and artistic creation. So to conclude, since artworks are vessels of ineffability, they are constructed to express something ineffable to the artist. In the case of the Parthenon sculptures, it was a religious pantheon. In the sonnet, it was the ineffable of the marbles as an exquisite piece of art. On certain occasions, experiencing artworks might lead to an enhanced aesthetic experience when the audience is fully immersed in that experience. And this may yield perceptual affective effects, which is a combination of these 2 non-propositional effects. Now, since ineffability is intertwined with the expressive aspect of communication, a question to think about is the following. Is the experience of artistic stimuli guided by relevance, or when the expectations of relevance are fulfilled, is it guided by affect? So thank you. I hope I did my 20 minutes. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I'll gladly try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chara. Yes, you were right on time, which leaves us with plenty of time to discuss the interesting ideas you presented in your talk. So if people could raise their hand so that I can see who would like to ask a question.
I think that, yeah, you're muted.
Yes, I'm using the space bar to activate the microphone, and it's less than optimal. Okay, so I will take this opportunity to ask a question that came to mind, which is a clarification question about the concepts that you use in terms of effects. So you had these three types of effects at some point in your presentation, where you have cognitive effects, perceptual effects, and affective effects, with some degree of overlap between cognitive effects and perceptual effects. My question to you is whether you could explain a little bit further how a perceptual effect can fail to be a cognitive effect always. My impression, I can see why a perceptual effect or an affective effect is non-propositional, but to say that it's non-cognitive is perhaps something that needs clarification for me.
Okay, thank you for the question, Didier. I'll try to answer it because the diagram is based on Kolaiti's suggestion that perceptual effects activate minimal cognitive effects, and that's why I had the circles intersect. So perceptual effects have to do with the senses and the aesthetic pleasure we derived from art. So it's not something that we can put into words. At least that's how I understand it. But they don't fail to yield also cognitive effects. But according to Kolaiti, if I have understood correctly, I hope I have, it's about the dominance of perceptual effects over cognitive effects. It's not the first thing, let's say, that comes to mind. Is they kind of, I would dare say, overlap with cognitive effects. And the notion of minimal cognitive effect she uses has to do with cognitive effects of that type occur in a sub-attentive level, and they modify the process instead of having to do with conceptual processes, and they lead to gradual improvements. So it's like one of the gears to the machine. That's how I understood. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Yes, you did. Thank you. That's clear. I think I disagree with the view. That's the reason why I wanted to ask the question. But I'll leave the floor for other questions. Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case, or am I missing anything? Can anybody tell me if I'm being terribly rude and ignoring them when I shouldn't? Okay, so thanks again very much, Chara, for this presentation, and we'll now move on to our next speaker. Although in the interest of allowing people to attend other people's presentation, I suggest we start on the hour sharp, which will give you time, Constant, to set up your screen sharing. Is this okay? All right. So once again, thank you very much, Chara.
You're welcome. So you think that, since we have a bit of time, so you think that perceptual effects don't, it's very unlikely to activate cognitive effects, if I have understood correctly. Is that what you were saying?
No, I'm saying the opposite. I think that the overlap between perceptual effects and cognitive effects is total, but
okay.
that's my impression.
So there are no perceptual effects. In fact, they are cognitive.
Well, you might still want to keep the distinction, but as a subcategory.
Mm. Okay, I'll keep that in mind, although I disagree. Thank you for the comment.
I see Stavros is moving.
Yes, hi. Just to thank you so much for this talk. It was really interesting and actually very close to heart as well, because I'm a fellow Greek and, you know, the Partnenon Marbles and everything. In relation to this discussion we're having now, I think that I've always sort of struggled to identify. I think that there is an element of cognitive effect in everything, to be honest, like perceptual effects, affective effects, even in the sense that you need to have some type of content that will lead you to an emotional sort of reaction or whatnot. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on this, because I've been also struggling, you know, with trying to delineate. Like, I don't think that they are like sort of different categories of effects. I think that, you know, all stimuli can cause all three, and at the same time it's not very clear cut where one ends and the other starts. I mean, I know that theoretically we have to distinguish between them, but I find it quite hard to suggest that, like, let's say a metaphor has only got a cognitive effect and not some affective aspect. For example, I think that this is, you know, it's a given that a metaphor tends to have also an affective one. So wondering where you stand on this.
Thank you. Quick answer, please, Chara.
Yeah, I'll try very, very quick. Thank you, Stavros, for the question. I kind of agree with you. I don't think that, you know, when you're experiencing, let's say, artwork, you just have either affective or perceptual effects. You definitely have cognitive effects, but because human communication is not solely about words, you know, we feel, so it's something else as well. Yeah, I think that cognitive effects are there, but sometimes something is, I dare to say, more dominant. So
yes,
you know,
yes, sure. That I don't disagree for sure. Yes.
Maybe that's, you know, a limitation of my diagram. So I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, sorry to abruptly cut these discussions, but that was a very interesting comment. I think I'm leaning very clearly on Stavros' side on this one.